Hello, you lovely, lovely people. How are you? My name is Cameron, and welcome to Games Up Podcast. We are sat here, freshly exhausted from the show floor of EGX 2017. It was, as ever, a fantastic show. Firstly, thank you very much to everyone at Eurogamer and at EGX who's responsible for putting the show together. You outdo yourselves year over year over year, and thank you very much for doing the work so that we can go along and enjoy it. But that leads me very quickly to our topic of the week, as we're going to talk about EGX all week this week. We've got some special stuff coming up this week. Over the next 10 days, we're going to release all our previews, all our special projects from EGX, so that you can get a whole bunch of EGX goodness before we start our EGX Indie Views. That's right, they've got a better name this year, Indie Views, over the coming month. As always, we have a special month, an indie month from EGX, and October will be that month. So we're going to go hard on EGX this week, and then settle down into the indies next week. That leads me, as I say, to our topic of the week, which is how can EGX 2018 be bigger and better than this? You see, for the last couple of years, EGX has been at the top of its game. It's been getting publishers in who are at the top of the industry with their massive AAA titles for this year and early next year. It's been getting games that you didn't think would be playable, like Detroit this year, for example, and putting them into the hands not just of people who are at the event, but the general public that sign up to attend. This is a pretty big thing. Most events of this size are for select members of the industry, the press, and a very small amount of the public. Even E3 this year became a more public-facing event, but it was still mainly dominated by the press, enthusiasts, and industry people themselves. So the question is, how can EGX 2018 go up to the next level? How can it take the next step in what EGX could be? And I think I have a couple of suggestions. Firstly, a specific VR space. For a couple of years now, EGX has had some of the most interesting takes on VR that I've seen all year. We've had indie developers and Left Field Collection developers alike, and if you don't know what the Left Field Collection is, it's a collection of games that don't resemble typical video games, so they don't have typical inputs, they look different and play different and function differently, so hopefully that clarifies that. But it's had a range of indie developers and left field developers doing new and interesting things with VR, but they can be a bit difficult to find in among the hustle and bustle of the EGX show floor. I think, therefore, a good way to remedy this would be to allow those developers to have stands in the indie section and the left field section, but also to have a specific VR section of the show. EGX, remember, is aimed at the general public who are likely to be buying these games over the next 6 to 9 months, and a lot of the general public will want to try VR first before they jump in and buy it. VR is a big cost, and it's a big commitment. Buying VR means buying the space to use VR. It means buying the time to use VR. VR isn't like a regular game where you sit down and turn it on and play it. You have to be in the right frame of mind to play VR. You also have to have the space to be able to store the equipment, put the equipment on your head and use it safely. It's quite a commitment to get into it. Giving a specific space for members of the public to come along, try out some of the stuff they want to try out in VR, and finally decide whether they make the jump to the technology or not could be a big thing, especially as it would clear up a little bit of confusion that happens in among the indie and the left field collection. The next suggestion is going to sound like a small one, but it is one that I think would make a big difference, and that's more tannoy announcements. Bear with me on this one. When you hit the show floor of EGX, the show floor is loud and very busy. There are a lot of people queuing for a lot of games. There's a lot of different things happening, and often there are lots of people in cosplay, for example, or making videos on the floor, for example, or cough cough, conducting interviews on the show floor, for example, and that stuff all kind of blends together into a lot of noise. So it can be a bit difficult to work out unless you have an idea of the games you're going in for, what you want to do, where you want to go. Maybe you need a bit of help when you find yourself floundering in those moments between going from one thing to the next. Now, I know that EGX has an amazing selection of talks both in the Rezzed area from more independent developers and in the main theatre from massive developers and YouTubers like the Eurogamer team. It would be really cool if there were just a few more Tannoy announcements about this is starting in 15 minutes and then this is starting in 5 minutes. Now, to be fair, perhaps this already happens and it just got lost, in my opinion, among the noise. But if that is the case, then there needs to be a little bit more clarity there, just so that people are more likely to run over and catch a show of the Eurogamer team playing PUBG, for example. I'd have loved to watch that, I just didn't know when it was happening, and I did find myself floundering a little bit, so I'd have happily filled the time with it. My third suggestion is probably going to be the one they hear the most, but I do think it will help as the show grows bigger. More space and more kiosks. Today, we played quite a few games, to be fair, and quite a few games that we went in intending to play, but there were also a bunch of stuff that we wanted to play and didn't get the opportunity to. One of the reasons for this is because you queue a lot at EGX. It's a public-facing event, so a lot of the people on the show floor are there to get their hands on the biggest games that year and try them out to see if they want to jump into them. As a result of that, there's a massive amount of demand for every one of the big games in every side of the show. And if you want to try one or two of them, you're going to have to queue for them. But it's a shame because EGX has got bigger and bigger year over year. This year, they were in, I think, 4 or 5 halls, where last year they may have only been in 4. Hell, 4 years ago they were in Earl's Court, which, whilst a lovely venue, may it rest in peace, was considerably smaller than the halls they use now. It would be nice if EGX could expand more space and have that used to provide more kiosks so that the flow of people to those major games was more, rather than just the flow of people in and out of the show was more. If, rather than a 60-minute wait for Mario Odyssey, for example, there was 45 minutes, then I'd be much more tempted to stay around the Nintendo booth and maybe play Mario and Rabbids or Mario Kart 8. And that's dangerous, because Mario Odyssey was amazing, and I nearly left with the Switch already. If I played something else that was great, I might have left with one. But that's what they want. They want you to go there, they want you to enjoy the games, and the people who are showing these games off want you to think, man, I could really buy that right now. I think there might be more uptake on stuff like that if people could flow around the show floor a little bit more easily. But if I had to make my ideal suggestion, it would come a bit out of left field, and frankly it would be something that they probably don't want to do. My suggestion for EGX would be to let a few less people in. I would happily pay £10 more on the price of the ticket, for example, so that rather than 24, it's 34, if I could be guaranteed that I would wait less time to play some of those major games. I don't ever want EGX to be an expensive event, certainly no more expensive than the average consumer can get into, and I certainly don't want it to become an elitist event. But it can slog a bit when you have to queue 2.5 hours, for example, for a game, which is, you know, in some of the bigger queues, fairly realistic. This year I went to EGX for a day and a half, basically. It was supposed to be 2. It ended up being a day and a bit, kind of. And in that day and a bit, I managed to capture a number of interviews from the indie scene, which is something that we do every year. And then I managed to play 4 or 5 games, maybe 4 of those being major AAA. I would be tempted to buy a third ticket, undeniably, but I'd be even more tempted to buy a ticket on day 1 of the pre-sale if I knew that I was waiting in less queues and sort of paying for the privilege. Again, I don't ever want EGX to become an elitist thing, I don't ever want it to be out of the way of the average consumer, but it would be nice if that flow of people could increase, as I suggested. One more suggestion for it? And this again comes a little out of left field, and again is probably something they don't want to do, but give it another day. This year EGX started on Thursday, ran through to Friday, and then ran through Saturday and Sunday. I'd love it if it started Wednesday. I'd be really tempted to go if it started on Wednesday. Middle of the week, less people likely to turn up, you can run in, get what you need from it, and then if you choose to go on the weekend with your friends perhaps, or just to mop up the stuff you didn't get during the initial few days, well, you still haven't missed as much as you would have done if you could only go on the weekend or on one of 4 days, for example. Adding an extra day would be undeniably difficult for them. It adds a huge amount of cost, it adds a huge amount of responsibility for the developers that are there, and it would be undeniably exhausting for all the indie teams, for example. But it would be really lovely just to have that little bit more choice as to when we go, how often we go, and how many days we can go for. Nonetheless, EGX is on the right track. A couple of years ago, we asked, is EGX on the brink of becoming the next big trade show? And I think it has. It's undeniable now that you hear the letters EGX being thrown around the industry far more than you did a couple of years ago, and that's a good thing. EGX has really put its foot down in the ground and said it's here and it's not going anywhere. So I can't wait for EGX 2018, and I look forward to seeing how they make it bigger and better, as they always have done. These are just a couple of suggestions of how maybe they can go about it. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that this week you look out for our EGX content, which will contain a bigger variety of content for EGX than we have ever made before, including the short film that we put out last week and the content that we're going to be putting out this week. Thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard here, please consider liking the show so that we get out in front of a few more people, because that's really helpful, and it helps us know that we're doing something good, which is great. And you're welcome to subscribe to it as well. We post every Monday at 6:30 p.m. on YouTube, and much earlier that day, so you can catch it on your way to work on iTunes. And we also have a Facebook and a Twitter page. We're at Games Upcast on both. Thanks very much for listening. See you next week. See you in 2018 EGX, and until then, the game's up.